Hello, welcome to this video from Mr. Gill's Science Stuff. I'm planning on doing something a little bit different today. This is not specifically curriculum linked, but this is basically a summary of what we know about coronavirus from a KS3 perspective. If the news coverage and everything is a bit confusing and you don't actually know the biology behind what people are actually talking about, then hopefully these videos will help. This is the first of three. I'm planning to do one at KS3 level, one at GCSE and one at A level. So if there's not enough detail in this one, follow the links in the description and indeed watch the other two as and when they're made. So, first things first, let's start at the basics. What do we mean by a virus? So, there are three types of organisms that can do us harm, microorganisms that can do us harm. These are the so-called pathogens. You've got the bacteria, the virus and the fungi. So, bacteria, you might be aware, are single-celled living organisms. Mostly they are harmless to us. Some are actually really helpful. Your gut couldn't function without them. They're very, very quick or rapid reproducing. They feed in your tissues, and some of them make toxins that harm us. Things like cholera, botulinum makes Botox. That's where we get that from. And they're very, very potent toxins, and they make us sick. So viruses, on the other hand, are what we call acellular. They're not living things. They can't reproduce on their own. They get inside your cells and they force your cells to make copies of them. Then they burst the host cell on the way out. That is basically how they cause damage to you and indeed anything that they're affecting. Now, fungal cells are much, much bigger than these previous two. They're a very similar size to your cells, so they cause different kinds of illness and rarely cause illnesses inside the body. They cause things like athlete's foot, thrush, those kind of different illnesses, very, very external. What they do, if they can colonize an area, they make digestive enzymes that they secrete onto whatever they're living on, which digest them externally and they absorb the nutrients. So if that's you, that can cause some external irritation, itching, rashes, things like that. Mostly that's what fungi do. We're obviously going to focus particularly on the viruses, but I want to get one thing straight before we go any further. We're not using the word germs. Okay, germs is a really vague terminology. Basically means anything illness causing that we can't see. It is too basic even for Key Stage 3 study, and certainly anything higher. So what we really want to be using are words like this. So microbes, as we said, are mostly harmless. Many of them are helpful. They're small living organisms that are smaller than we can see without a microscope, generically referred to as microbes. Sometimes we lump the viruses in there as well. Pathogens are microorganisms that harm you in some way, and I can't stress enough, it is a very small minority of microorganisms that actually do you any harm, but they're just the ones we notice, and we call those pathogens. So, for scale, right, these things are very, very tiny. So let's think about something you can see to start with, a frog egg, which is up the top there, at 1 millimetre. If we go down, now notice this graph isn't going down in a straight line, it's going down in factors of 10. Every single division is 10 times smaller than the larger one to the side here. So we've got 1 millimetre, 100 microns, which is a tenth of a millimetre, 10 microns, and so on and so forth. And we have to come right the way down to here to 1 micron-ish, that order of magnitude, before we get our bacteria. So bacteria obviously very, very tiny, and then the smallest end of the bacteria spectrum almost overlaps with the largest end of the viruses. But viruses on the whole are far, far, far smaller. So again, we have to divide that by 10 and that by 10 again, and now we're down on the kind of nanometer scale, which is where we find our polioviruses and things like that. So we've got flu viruses here at the 100 nanometer scale, our bacteria at the 1 micron scale, and then things we can actually see, like frog eggs and so on and so forth, about from 1 millimeter upwards. So there's a massive, massive scale difference between the two, with viruses being the smallest of our pathogens. Okay, so this is a generic structure for a virus. As you can see, it's a very simple organism. It's got some nucleic acids, either DNA or RNA, that contain the information for making more viruses. It's got a protein coat. It's got an envelope, usually made of fat, right, lipids that are taken from your cell membrane when it bursts out of the previous host cell, and spikes for attaching to other cell surfaces. And we're going to come back to those spikes in a little while. Okay, so that's a generic structure of what a virus looks like. So there's been a lot of names in the news for this disease: coronavirus, COVID, COVID-19, all these kind of different things. Now, for clarity, this is what the World Health Organization is characterizing this disease as. So the disease itself, i.e. the collection of symptoms that you get if you are infected with this virus, is coronavirus disease, or Covid-19 for short. So Covid-19 is the disease, it is the illness. Okay? The virus itself is severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2. Okay? Coronavirus 1 was called SARS, and that came out about 10 years ago and spread around the world, so you may or may not remember that depending on how old you are. So that's referred to as SARS-CoV-2 for short. So the top is the disease, the illness that you get, and the bottom is the actual virus. So some notes here on this nomenclature is kind of medical. So coronaviruses are a family of viruses that infect you along with coronaviruses, rhinoviruses, and they cause upper respiratory tract infections, colds, coughs, flus, things like that. And then another word in there, the word syndrome, that literally means a collection of symptoms. So think irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, it's got syndrome in it, yeah? AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, these are all collections of symptoms. So medically we call a syndrome a collection of symptoms. So if you see those words coming up now, you know what they mean. So how do we spread viruses? This you should know very easily from all the public health information that's been out there. Main ways: we've got air, we've got contact, we've got water, we've got animals. There are others, but of course we want to focus on coronavirus. So droplet infection causing sneezes, you've probably seen this famous picture here, sort of from being too close to people, is one of the main ways that viruses like flu and colds get spread around. However, it seems that COVID doesn't seem to make you sneeze for some reason. Okay, this particular virus doesn't make you sneeze, it makes you cough, dry cough, and have a fever. So early indications suggest that maybe contact is most important. There's some literature you can read on that if you're interested, but that's early indications. We don't know how correct that is, but this is why we're distancing ourselves from each other. Okay, more on that as well a bit later. So, next question, will I get it? Will I get COVID? Well, the simple answer is there's no way to tell. There's too many factors that make it more likely or less likely that you're going to get this particular illness. So, one thing that's interesting is you may already have had it. Okay, now you might have heard this said in the media, at various places, you may have already had the illness. There are tests that can tell this coming out this week, and hopefully they'll become more available over the next few weeks. Okay, now you might have seen that word there, asymptomatic. What that means is that you've got no symptoms and you're still infectious. Okay, now there were a lot of people tested for this in places like South Korea and in Iceland. Turns out a lot of people can have the virus in them but not show any symptoms, which obviously is great for them, but it's terrible for the people that they meet who might be a bit more susceptible to that virus. So obviously it depends on who you've seen, where you live, how good your hand hygiene is, how good your social distancing is, and so on and so forth. And we'll get more onto those things a little bit later. Now obviously the good thing for you guys, if you are a KS3 student watching this, is you are far less likely to suffer symptoms of this disease. It's not impossible, but you're far less likely to suffer symptoms of this disease, which makes it great for you, but means you are have to be more careful about who you're meeting, who you're talking to, and who you might be passing it on to. So, simple answer is, we don't know, will you get it? Okay? Next one. How do you treat coronaviruses, or viruses in general? Why isn't there an effective medicine that we can just go and take and get rid of this virus like all other viruses? Well, the problem with viruses is they actually live inside your cells. So for any medicine to actually get to them, they'd have to get inside your cells, which creates a problem. And if they were going to destroy your cells, if they were toxic enough to kill the virus, they'd probably be toxic enough to kill the cells they were in as well. And that's not a good thing for the patient. Also, they're not alive in their own right. So there's not really a kind of way you can kill them. You can destroy them. Certainly you can destroy the particles, you can render them inactive, but there's not really an easy way to kill something that isn't technically alive. They're also incredibly small and incredibly numerous and can live outside the body for some hours or some days, depending on which virus you're talking about. So there's a number of challenges. So best way we've found is treating symptoms and then letting your immune system deal with the virus, because your immune system is probably the best biochemist you're ever going to find. We are a long, long way, even with our most sophisticated medicines, from being our immune systems in terms of making specific targeted therapies for diseases. So, if you've got mild symptoms, you probably know this, same as any cold or flu, bed rest, paracetamol because it lowers fever as well, and keeping your fluid intake up. If you've got more serious issues, then what a doctor might do is they might put you on a drip for fluids if you can't drink enough and take medicines in orally. And very seriously, if you're having trouble breathing, because this is a disease of the lungs, they might put you on what's called a respirator, which supports your breathing. But if you think you're anywhere near that kind of severity, you need to be contacting the NHS straight away, and there's lots of information online, the NHS website, on how you should be doing that, and when you should be doing that. So, really important thing, you cannot take antibiotics for this disease, right? Antibiotics only affect bacteria. Lots of people who seem to have got the impression over the last few decades that antibiotics cure everything. They absolutely don't. They kill bacteria only. Okay, and this is not a bacterial disease, right? It's a viral disease. So taking antibiotics would kill some of those good bacteria inside you, and really all you'd get would be the side effects of taking antibiotics and no therapeutic benefit. So please, please, please don't think you should be taking antibiotics for a virus, because you absolutely shouldn't. That causes more problems than it solves, but that's a subject for another video. So, why are we all getting ill at the same time, and how do we end up getting better from this? How do we end up coming out of this? Well, the reason we're all getting ill at the same time is this is a new version of the virus. Okay, it's not a version that we've seen, therefore we don't have any immunity to it, and that again is a term you've probably heard before, being immune to something. But what does that actually mean? So our immune systems, they need time. They need time to work out how to best tackle this particular virus. Okay, now those spikes we looked at earlier on the virus, remember those there? They're called antigens. That's the proper terminology. And it's one, if you're a KS3 going into GCSE student, you are expected to know. So they're called antigens. They're used for recognition. Now your immune system is really, really clever at recognizing which shapes on the outside of cells, which antigens are yours and which are foreign, so which therefore need to be destroyed and which can be left alone. Okay, so this is basically a really quick overview, and it is a simplification of how the immune system works. We'll do a more advanced version as we go up through the stages to GCSE and to A-level. So if that's our virus, that's how the virus has entered our body. The red spikes are the antigens. Now your body doesn't recognise those antigens, so immediately the immune system kicks into effect. So that's our virus. There's a virus over there. Now there's a group of cells, and again I'm not going to go into too much detail, that these are all white blood cells that start to pick up that invading pathogen and start to recognise it's not part of you and start to create a response. Now I've skipped to one type of white blood cell here called the lymphocytes. Now lymphocytes are a type of white blood cell. There's another type called the phagocyte, we'll come to in a little bit. Right, so what this helper lymphocyte does is it goes off with a sample of the virus that it's found, and it finds a lymphocyte that can make something called an antibody. So here are our lymphocytes. They're resting, usually in a place called lymph nodes. So if you've ever been ill and these glands here have started to swell up, right, well that's what's happening. You're having an immune response and you're starting to manufacture cells that can make antibodies to a disease. So, amongst other cells as well. So these antibodies, once they've been found, once they've been woken up, these are the ones that can make a special targeted antibody against this disease. They start to produce those antibodies. Now they're little Y-shaped protein molecules, and what they do when they've built up is they start to get released out of the lymphocytes into your bloodstream and into around your tissues where the virus would be. Okay? When they come into contact with the virus, they've got just the right shape on the top of those Ys to start sticking them together. Okay? Which one inactivates them. Right? Remember, they use those spikes to get into your cells. Right? They use those spikes to get into your cells, so once they've got antibodies on them, they can't do that. And it also glues them together, which makes it very easy for the other type of white blood cell, the phagocyte, to pop in here and consume them all and destroy them, get rid of them. Okay? So that's a very simple, simplified way of how your immune system works. And the reason we're all getting ill at the same time is COVID, coronavirus, this version has new antibodies, has new antigens on the outside. It has new spikes on the outside, which means that we have to manufacture new antibodies from new lymphocytes to tackle it. Okay, so why do we get the symptoms? Well, this process takes a little while, from infection to the immune response to having enough antibodies in your blood to destroy the virus. That takes time, and it's in that time that you will experience the symptoms. And that's the same of any illness, regardless of what it is. Okay, so making the correct white blood cells and the antibodies takes a number of days, and while that happens, you are ill. Okay, so why has it been made the rule that you have to be stuck at home, that we can't be doing this in school, and you have to be sat at home watching me on video? Well, COVID's pretty infectious. Now, by that I mean it can, if one person has it, it can infect a lot of other people. Okay. Now, this social distancing, as it's called, this staying at home and not seeing people, not going anywhere, stops transmission. Okay. If you're not seeing people, if you're in your own house, you can't possibly be transferring it to other people. Now, you probably, as we've already mentioned, don't need to worry specifically, but you may infect somebody that does, right? And that's the issue. Okay. If we can slow the transmission down enough, right, we can starve the virus of new people to infect, right, well, we create treatments, right, in that time, we can manufacture vaccines in that time and equip hospitals better in that time. So the reason you're at home is to protect the vulnerable people in our society and buy the NHS time, rather than having everybody get ill at the same time, everybody who's susceptible getting very, very sick and needing a hospital all at the same time, and getting to a point where there simply aren't hospital beds for them. That's why we're stuck at home. Okay, so this is the most complicated graph I'm going to show you, but it's quite a nice little graph. I'll put the link in the bottom. It's from a site called Information It's Beautiful that I highly recommend for this kind of thing. Now, this shows us here where COVID is on a graph that's got how many people you're likely to infect if you're sick, right, with a particular disease, versus how deadly this disease is. Now, the first thing to notice is that Covid-19 is quite low down on the deadliness scale there, right? So we shouldn't worry too much about that, certainly yourselves. Now, obviously, it is a deadly virus, right, but it's nowhere near as deadly as, say, bird flu, Ebola, smallpox, polio, tuberculosis, all these other ones, infectious diseases you may have heard of. It's also not as infectious as chickenpox, measles, norovirus, but it's about the same as the common cold. Now, we don't quite know where in that box that COVID-19 lies yet, right? But if we look where seasonal flu is here, seasonal flu is a good comparator, but it's a little bit less infectious, okay, and it's a little bit less deadly. So that's gone from one person, average number of people infected by each sick person, it's gone from 1 for someone with seasonal flu to somewhere around the 2 is the best estimate for COVID-19. Now that means instead of having one infected person who infects another and another and another, and you go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 people infected, if you're infecting 2 people, so one person infects 2 more, those people infect 2 each, so that goes to another 4, right? 4 to 8, 8 to 16, 16 to 32, and very, very quickly you see what's called an exponential growth. More on that in another video though. Okay, so that's what we're looking at in terms of why we're social distancing and why we're taking this so seriously. So the big question, of course, is when will this all be over? When will it end? Well, the answer to that, I'm afraid, again, is a big I don't know. Okay, I know nobody knows, because it depends on how well these measures work and how well we all stick to them. So you might have seen on the news just yesterday, from the time of recording, is this piece of news here that the Deputy Chief Medical Officer said that we could have 6 months before the UK returns to normal. But I would point out, what does return to normal mean? The detail of that story is they're going to look at the measures in place every 3 weeks and make adjustments as necessary, because of course everybody wants to return back to normal. They don't want to keep us in our houses any longer than they have to, but the risk, of course, if you release everybody too early, everybody comes out of their house and goes out into towns and theatres and cinema and restaurants and so on and so forth, that you get a second spike of the disease because we didn't quite stamp it down enough, right, and it therefore is still circulating in the population. But there are reasons to be optimistic. Right, the same group at Imperial College London who did the initial work that led to these restrictions, right, these social distancing restrictions, have done another paper which says that there's early signs, now it is very, very early signs, that it is working. that there are some signs that it's working. And there are various parts of the world who've done things slightly differently to us, where this kind of social distancing, testing, all these different strategies have worked. Think about China, think about South Korea. Okay, so it will work, it can work, exactly how long, nobody knows. So finally, what can you be doing? What should you be doing? Well, firstly, obey the advice. Stay home. Don't think you're an exception, because you're not. You may be fine, you may never get the disease, but you may infect somebody else, and that will keep this whole thing rumbling on for longer than it needs to. Stay fit. This is a respiratory tract infection. If you get ill, the more aerobically fit you are, the better. So do what you can in the space that you've got to keep your heart and lungs healthy. Do some exercise. Practice good hand hygiene. Reason being, soap and water are so good is soap dissolves fats, as we know, and the outside of that virus is held together by the fats that are taken from the cell that it came out of. So if you break those down, the virus just falls apart. Right? Very, very effective way to destroy virus particles. Be alert to the symptoms, dry cough and fever. Of course, there's advice from the NHS on how to spot these and what to do if they do come along. Help those that you can. Now, obviously, it's a stressful time for everybody, so keep up with your work, phone older friends and relatives, right? And don't try and think you can go outside and just see your friends just once, because we all need to stick to these rules as best we can. And as they come online, if offered, get tested. Reason being, if you're tested and the test shows that you have had the disease and you're producing these antibodies, well, that means that you're safe to go and be a bit more active in terms of helping the community. Okay, on that note, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you next time.